Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Lily Bewley podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is your host, Lily Bewley, and I'm honored to have conversations here with thought leaders, visionaries, healers, and even solo conversations with myself about things I am currently reflecting on. This is a place where we break down, break away, and break through our emotional trauma, allowing ourselves to be healthy, be happy, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. And it's happening through the practice and the love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls, and these are our stories of healing. Today, in episode 116, I welcome Dr. Gary Lawrence to the show to chat about our addiction to rejection. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts about this episode or anything you would like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, it is a safe place, and I would welcome the discussion. Also, a request, if you are enjoying the show, please rate and share and review so we can get the word out to more and more souls who want to heal. My guest today, Dr. Gary Lawrence, and his wife Sylvia, has spent their lives successfully leading others to identify, isolate, and eliminate the root cause of the emotional turmoil in their lives. Over the course of 23 years, serving as the founder and director of the New Life Dynamics Christian Counseling Center, and 20 years at the host of his own radio show, Life Mastery Counseling with Dr. G, he has personally met with and coached more than 6,000 clients, has overseen the counseling of another 10,000, and has inspired thousands more on radio, television, and stage. Before we begin today, a trigger warning with mentions of sexual abuse and also a trigger warning about religious abuse. My invitation to you is to replace maybe the word with God, with universe, with spirit, source, or higher power. I would have had to do that at one point, and I wanted to share that in this episode, which you will hear as well. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Dr. Gary Lawrence. Dr. G, welcome to the show. I know this is going to be great. You have been, you're an expert in all things relationship, all things trauma. You have so many decades, dare I say, experience under your belt. So I know we're going to have a great conversation today.
Well, thank you, Lily. It's an honor and a joy to be your guest today. And, I don't know how much of an expert I am today. I heard the definition of an expert is a drip under pressure. But anyway, my wife, Sylvia, and I, we've been married 55 years, and we had our own marriage and family counseling clinic for 23 years. And I was on the radio here in the Valley for over 20 years with the hour-long daily talk show. And so during that 23-year tenure, we've literally helped thousands of people learn how to get free from the past so they can enjoy the present and create a future free from all that emotional bondage.
Yes. And you have, I know I could just feel the wisdom just seeping out of you. And you shared too, before we started, that you and Sylvia have also gone through some things yourself, which is, we're survivors here. And something that you talk about is a difference between a survivor and an escaper. So we can get into that if you like, but yeah, I really appreciate you spending this time with us.
Well, you know what? Sylvia and I, we met in college, and she was raised in a strong Baptist Christian environment. And, church was always on demand, and performance was always expected. And she had to be the perfect child. Now, Sylvia is the oldest of 4 children. And from ages 7 to 12, her father was sexually abusing her, everything. And then her mother, even though she was quite the quintessential faithful Christian, in the eyes of other people, she was horribly physically abusive to her children. And one time when Sylvia was 9 years old, her mother beat her so bad she literally couldn't walk after the beating.
Wow.
So Sylvia handled her rejection by escaping. She would hide from her mother in the basement. And of course, the sexual abuse was the family secret. Don't ever tell the family secret. Now, I was the youngest of 4 children, and my father and mother were both severe alcoholics. And my father believed my mother got pregnant by another man, so I was called the bastard child.
Wow.
And he would say to my mother, "Get that little bastard out of my room." And so there was a lot of physical violence. And when I was 16 years old, Lily, I took my last beating and I fought back. I'll never forget that. As old as I get, I hit my father in the middle of the chest and knocked him through the bedroom window out in the side yard.
Wow.
And at the age of 16, I ran for my life. That was the last time I was home. So there was a lot of physical and moral violence in my home. Well, then I became a Christian when I was about 20 years old and went off to Bible college in Springfield, Missouri. And that's where I met my wife. And I didn't understand the dynamics of the emotional damage, and neither did my wife. And but anyway, I remember saying to my roommate, "Bob, you see that beautiful brown-eyed brunette over there?" He said, "Yeah, what about her?" I said, "I'm going to ask her out for a date, and I'll probably end up marrying her." Well, four months later, we were married. And so anyway, here we are at the wedding altar saying "I do," and we did the rest of our life. But anyway, Sylvia needed someone to dominate her, and I needed someone to dominate. See, I handled my rejection and abuse in my environment by becoming an escaper. By becoming the survivor. Sylvia became the escaper. So here we are, we're married, and then I go off to the mission field in Canada, started a church from scratch, didn't know anybody there. And in 3 years' time, we built a 450-seat auditorium. And then we built an educational facility for our Christian school, 125 students, just in 3 years' time. So I was very successful in the ministry, but boy, my marriage was horrible. I was unhappy. Sylvia was unhappy. So I began to, our marriage came to the place where Sylvia decided to leave me. And of course, my first response was, "Oh my gosh, what will the people in the church think of me?" Instead, my response should have been, "Oh, my poor wife, I'm not meeting her needs." So anyway, I made a promise, "Sylvia, if you don't leave, I'm going to find the answers." And so I got into the Word of God and I began to study body, soul, and mind. And I really began to understand that man's a triunity. We are a body, we are a spirit, and we are a soul. Now, on the spirit level, everything was fine. I was a child of God, okay? Our spirit is that part of us that relates to God. It's that part of us that it's our conscience. It says, this is right, this is wrong. But our soul is the residence of our emotions. That's what we feel to be true. It's the residence of our mind. That's what we know to be true. Now, when what we know and how we feel are in collision, it damages our will, our ability to respond to life's circumstances. For an example, I know God loves me. I don't feel like God loves me. I know I can do it, but I don't feel like I can do it. I know I'm successful. I don't feel like I'm successful. Well, it's like 2 gears grinding inside of a motor. And when that grinding takes place, then your will, your ability to respond to life's circumstances is damaged. So instead of having a life of joy and peace and fulfillment, we have issues with hostility, anxiety, depression, feelings of inferiority, insecurity, depression. Oh my goodness, depression is catastrophic in our country, especially today with everything that's going on. And so once I began to understand the dynamics, instead of focusing on spiritual aspects, I began to find a solution. How can I eliminate this conflict between the mind and the emotions? And that's what I wrote my book about. It's called Rejection Junkies. And everybody, Lily, everybody experiences rejection on some level. I don't care who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for sharing all that. And that is really, really powerful. There are a lot of things happening on my side, so I'm going to try to organize them.
Okay.
But organize my mind, my body, my spirit over here. But
There.
so about the escaper and survivor, it seems like it's not through, like when I think of survivor, it's not the traditional I guess definition of a survivor. I get the escaper part because that was me for a long time. Like
Okay.
that was my coping mechanism, was avoidance, was running away. I moved across the country like 2 or 3 times, to get
Yeah.
away from situations that were pretty dangerous for me. But the
Wow.
survivor part sounds to me like, the way that you were saying it sounds to me like about like an aggressor. Is that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh yes. I didn't understand the dynamics, but in my mind, in my emotional conflict, I had set up a survival technique of defense, and the only
Mm-hmm.
way I could defend myself was by being in control.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Sylvia, the only way she could defend herself was by escaping.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my introduction to see the family secret was she was severely sexually abused by her father.
Right.
Well, my introduction to that was 3 months after we were married. I
Mm-hmm.
was out speaking and I wasn't supposed to come home until Monday noon, but I got home late Sunday evening and she was already asleep. And I went into the house and fixed myself something to eat, took a shower and got in bed and began to snuggle her like a young husband would.
Mm-hmm.
And she literally jumped out of bed so fast, Lily, she slammed herself against the wall.
Wow.
And for the next 4 hours, she sat there with her arms around her knees, drawn up to her chest, saying, "You can't touch me like that. You can't do that to me. Oh, don't let my daddy know what you're doing."
Mm.
Well, that was my introduction. Lily,
Wow.
for the next 4 hours, my wife had literally lost her mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, now she was a Christian. Okay. But mentally and emotionally, she was pretty damaged. Well, guess what? She married a damaged man.
Right. Yeah. That's what
Okay.
tends to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I say it like this: opposites attract, then they attack, and then they retract.
Wow. Attract, attack, retract.
And retract. Absolutely. See,
Yeah.
I would say, why don't you talk to me? And she said, well, you're always mad. I'm not always mad. You never talk to me. Well, I was always mad. That's why she wouldn't talk to me.
It's a
So,
vicious cycle like that.
well, you're absolutely right. Here we are. We're two rejection junkies shooting each other up in our emotional
Ooh,
bloodstreams.
yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Totally. Totally. One thing I do want to kind of to sit in with before we get into the rejection junkies, because I have a whole lot
Sure.
of questions about this,
Sure.
is something about, I'll be completely transparent with you, Dr. G. I do not talk a lot about spirit and God here in this space. So this is actually a first for me and my
Okay.
listeners.
And
And
I respect that.
yeah, so, and I don't know, I feel like you're open to this conversation. If you're not, please tell me. I know you will put up a boundary if you need to, but you've been a
Sure.
pastor in the past, so I'm sure it's nothing that you
Sure.
haven't
Yeah.
encountered.
Sure.
What I realized, so I also grew up in a Southern Baptist environment, and
Okay.
my biggest wounds, I guess, in that environment was the hypocrisy, right?
Sure.
And I would go home. There's a lot of things, there's the fear, like God is fear. It felt like he
Yeah.
felt fearful to me and not loving to me.
Right.
And that was continuously, it was continuously reinforced,
Right.
and in the church and also at my home, where like dad was God, right? And we were fearful of him, and it was do as I say, not as I do, all of the
Right.
things. Like that's a big synopsis
Right.
of where I'm coming from with spirit.
Right.
And so what I just want to put out there for my listeners, that because this was me, it's not me anymore. Like I can say God now without being triggered or without
Right.
being angry.
Right.
And I have experienced what you said, which is that lining up of spirit, mind, body, and soul, right?
Right.
Which is my connection to spirit, also
Yes.
connects to my emotions. But I had been cut off. I had been Sylvie in that situation with God for a long time. So I
Uh-huh.
think I just want to just say, like, to my listeners, like, if you are getting triggered, if you were like me when we're talking about God or Lord, what helps me is just changing the word to love or universe or something,
Well,
or creator.
yeah, there you go. Well, let me make it clear for your listeners. I'm a recovered Baptist. Okay. I identify with what you're saying 100%. See, legalism says that if you perform, we will accept you. God's grace says you are accepted no matter how you perform.
Mm-hmm.
And so you came out of legalism. That legalism that you were raised in almost destroyed you, just like it destroyed my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
And so we came together in this so-called Christian spiritual environment, emotionally damaged. We were emotional cripples.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my book, I say it like this. Christians have problems. Christians get divorced. Christians commit suicide. Christians lie. Christians steal. There's no safe place for a Christian or a Muslim or any person involved in any kind of religion if God is portrayed as a cruel taskmaster.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I appreciate your candidness here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for opening up this conversation. It's so interesting. The cruel taskmaster makes me think of and so I had that experience, and then it was reinforced in the church and at home. And then as I got older, it was reinforced with my inner critic, with myself.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And my manager, my manager parts, if we're talking about therapy, right?
Right.
So yeah, just so interesting.
Well, see, what happened is once you get away from that childhood home environment, you don't have anybody to condemn you, to criticize you, to attack you anymore. So guess what? You become the criticizer. Mm-hmm. You become the attacker. You become that taskmaster, and you become self-destructive as a result of the habitual abuse you received in your childhood. Mm-hmm. See, the truth is, by the time we're 8 years old, 80% of our emotional patterns are formed. Mm-hmm. By the time we're 18, 100% of our self-image is formed. Okay. I remember I had a retired medical doctor come to me for counseling. He was 80 years old and his wife was 76. And they'd been married, I think at that time, 50 some years. And so I told him this, by the time we're 8 years old, 80% of our emotional patterns are formed. By the time we're 18, 100% of our self-image is formed. Then you go on to age 25, 35, 45, 55, 65. The older you get, the less opportunity you have to mature emotionally. Oh, you may get some education. You may be successful financially. You have a few wrinkles and a lot of gray hair, but you still have the emotional patterns of a child. So he looked at me and he says, well, Dr. G, what you're telling me is I'm an 80-year-old, 8-year-old. And I said, yeah, that's about it. And his wife leaned over and patted him on the leg and said, see, sweetheart, I've been telling you for years, you act like a little boy.
Yeah. I used to joke when I was I think it was like it was my early 30s. And I didn't even know anything about what we're talking about today. And I used to joke, like if I was on dates or something like that, I would joke, oh yeah, like I'm a 13-year-old in a 30-year-old's body. And I think like that it's funny, but it's also very self-deprecating, in a way. Well,
well, it's self-deprecating in one way, but it's truth in another way.
Oh yeah, it was very true. Absolutely. Very wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a little 8-year-old boy in my marriage, and Sylvia's a little 8-year-old girl, and we were just kids playing that game. I'll reject you before you reject me, and we didn't even know we were doing it. Because see, there's two kinds of rejection. There's overt and covert rejection. Overt rejection is very obvious. It's name calling, it's physical abuse, it's that ugly stare, it's that mean look in your mother and father's eyes. So overt rejection, very obvious, which I was the recipient of overt rejection from my father. Covert rejection is very subtle. Okay. That's hard to trace. For an example, my mother overprotected me. My mother smothered me. She tried to make up for my father's abuse. Okay. And so what I did not know as a kid, I pushed my mother away from me, hoping I would gain my father's acceptance.
Mm.
Well, guess what? It didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, we grow up these little human beings into what we think is an adult world, but we still have that emotional pattern from our childhood controlling us.
Yeah. I talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
I specifically talk about dating and help women with dating, but that's exactly what I say. I say, it's not really you that's picking these unavailable men. It's the younger part of you that is actually, quote unquote, self-sabotaging or picking these people.
Well, you are 100%, Lillian. I love your outreach and the way you're helping people. You and I are on the same page. It's that childhood habitual rejection pattern that unconsciously is controlling your mind and your emotions as an adult.
Yeah. So I want to have enough time for the rejection junkies.
Sure.
This book has been around for a while. You're working on or have updated it. So I'm curious about that, but then I'm also curious about why focusing on rejection. That is super curious to me.
Well, rejection is the underlying cause of all mental and emotional conflict. And we absorb 80% of our emotional patterns by the time we're 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, why do I have such an anger problem? Sylvia, why does she have such a fear problem?
Mm-hmm.
Why could we not have a healthy sexual relationship as a husband and wife? And so you keep saying, why? You've got to come up with some solutions. Would you agree with me?
100%.
So I did the typical church thing. I called pastors. And all I kept hearing was, well, you need to pray about it. Well, you just need to get right with God. Well, you need to go to church more. Perform. And I got so sick of that, Lily. And when I began to understand how I was created as a triunity, body, soul, and spirit, and I began to unlock the confusion between my mind and my emotions, and I began to experience genuine peace in my mind and my emotions, that's when everything began to calm down in my personal life, my relationship with my wife, and my relationship with my children. Okay. So, it all goes back to a biblical term. It says that we should search closely, diligently, lest any root of bitterness springs up and troubles you and defiles many. Bitterness does two things. It defiles you and it defiles many. Okay. It troubles you. Now, bitterness is an ugly word. Okay. Bitterness is not the kind of word you want to embrace and say, oh, I'm bitter. But I've come up with some definitions of what real bitterness is. And I came up with these. These are not in Webster's dictionaries. These are mine. Bitterness is an inward resentment. Bitterness is a wounded spirit. And I'll never forget, Sylvia and I, we were driving home from El Paso, Texas to Albuquerque. And I had come to the place where I said, Sylvia, I'm going to divorce you. I want you to know I'm not angry with you. I'm not upset. I'm not mad, but I will not live with an emotional cripple the rest of my life. And she looked at me, she said, but I'm not like you. And I said, what do you mean? You're always mad. And so I just listened to her and I said, yeah, Sylvia, you're right. You're not like me. I am always mad. I do have anger problems, but you have a wounded spirit. And she says, what do you mean? I said, when your father sexually abused you, he wounded your spirit. And I'm telling you what, Lily, it was like the faucet was turned on. She started sobbing. She cried. For the first time in her life, she began to understand that she was a wounded individual. And I said, Sylvia, my outward anger, you can say I'm bitter, but your inward wounded spirit, that's a cause of bitterness. That's the result of bitterness. And so when I began to understand that bitterness is defined in so many ways, you show me someone that creates a sense of guilt in you, I'll show you someone you have a root of bitterness towards. You show me someone that creates a sense of anxiety, I'll show you someone you have a root of bitterness towards. You show me someone that you avoid being with, I'll show you someone you have a root of bitterness towards. Okay. Often in my counseling clinic, I would ask my clients, where's your father buried? Well, he was buried up in New York State. Well, that's about 2,500 miles from here. So the bottom line is you are attached to your father's grave with a 2,500-mile long emotional umbilical cord.
Mm.
And no matter where you go, that emotional umbilical cord continues to feed all these negative emotional patterns in you. Okay. Bitterness is a sense of betrayal. You show me someone that has betrayed you, I'll show you someone that you have a root of bitterness towards. And on and on and on it goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm hearing that from your perspective, the root is bitterness.
The root of
And
bitterness.
it from all of the decades that you've been doing this and your combined, spirit knowledge, rejection is a byproduct of bitterness.
Oh, absolutely. Bitterness gives birth to rejection. Okay, bitterness continues to feed rejection. And so the bottom line, for an example, depression, okay? Now, depression, man, there's a lot of talk about how depressed our young people are today because of the political situation, the COVID and everything. But depression is really misunderstood. Even psychiatrists and psychologists will tell you that true depression cannot really be identified unless there is some kind of a test applied that will show a chemical imbalance in the blood. Okay. But I define depression as this: hostility turned inward. That's where you begin to beat yourself up emotionally. And Lily, you've done that to yourself in your past. You call it self-deprecation. I call it inward hostility. Lily made herself the object of her own hostility. You couldn't beat up on anyone else, so you beat up on Lily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And it's curious to me, the focus on rejection, because a few things of what's coming up for me is that I think in a sense that we all, for us that have had covert and overt abuse or trauma, and the word that you use is covert and overt. What was the word that you used?
Covert and overt rejection.
Yeah, rejection. Is that we don't end it like we don't feel like that we belong. We feel like that we're in a family that doesn't love us, or why aren't they sticking up for us, or why are they treating us like that, right? And rejection is just a very interesting way to think about it, because I get what you're saying, because we really do want to end up belonging, but these patterns, if we don't heal them, will continue to repeat themselves. And I think that's where what you say with, like, that's the idea with rejection junkies, right? Is that until they're healed, we will continue to seek out these situations that can feed this.
Right. And see, the bottom line is it's what I call the generational pass down. Yeah. Okay. So all the rejection you received, all the rejection I received was passed down to me from my parents. Well, guess what was passed down to your parents and my parents? Rejection. Oh, yeah. It just goes on generation after generation after generation. And so when I began to understand these truths, I said, I've got to find a way to break this cycle. And once I began to identify the root of bitterness was what was in my emotional bloodstream. For an example, my father-in-law, I hated him. Okay, well, guess what? I was good at hating people. My mother and father taught me how to hate. And so because of what happened to my wife, I realized that no matter who she married, that man would become the victim of a second order. So in one sense of the word, Lily, you and I and every person that listens to this podcast, they have become a victim of the second order from rejection that was passed down to them from their parents. Okay. And so when I began to understand that bitterness is what continued to fuel the fire, okay, then I said, I've got to find a way to get rid of that poison that's in my emotional bloodstream. And in my book, Rejection Junkie, is a chapter entitled The Emotional Surgery. And that is the most painful surgery that any human being can ever go through. Okay. But you're dealing with the bitterness. So here's what happened. When I came to the point, I realized that what my father-in-law did to my wife is not my problem. My problem was my bitterness towards him. As soon as I stopped focusing on what happened to my wife and I began to start focusing on my bitterness, I knew I had to get rid of my bitterness. What he did was not my problem. My bitterness was my problem. Bitterness, when you hold bitterness in your heart, it's like you drinking a cup of poison and waiting for the other person to die. Okay. It's so self-destructive. Okay. So I remember I called my father-in-law. This is part of my emotional surgery in my book. People may not ever want to buy the book after they hear what I'm going to say. But I realized, you see, you're not free to forgive as long as you're bitter. Okay. Sweet water or bitter water cannot flow through the same fountain. So I called my father-in-law, and we're just calling him Jim. I said, Jim, this is Gary. Yeah. He didn't talk much. And I said, Jim, I've been having some emotional problems, and I realized that part of my problem is I need to ask you to forgive me for something. He said, yeah, what's that? I said, could you please forgive me for my bitterness towards you? Dead silence. No one had ever asked him that question. And so I said, would you please forgive me for my bitterness towards you? And he said, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I guess I do. I said, okay, well, thank you. And I'm telling you what, Lily, it's like 1,000-pound weight was off my chest. I dealt with my bitterness. I didn't talk to him about what he did to my wife. That following week, I thought, I need to call him, tell him I love him. So that following week, I called him up and I said, hey, Jim, this is Gary. Yeah, what you doing? I said, well, I just wanted to call and tell you that I am so grateful that you're my father-in-law, and I'm so proud to be your son-in-law, and I want you to know I love you. Within a week's time, it went from extreme hatred, isolation from him, and rejection to one of genuine love and acceptance. And then my wife, she did the same thing about 3 weeks later. She was afraid to, because she thought he would come down to Albuquerque and kill her. I mean, that's how bad the situation was.
Right.
Well, when we began to understand the power that bitterness has on a person, and we began to get free of our bitterness, guess what? All those cycles began to disappear. We weren't just healed, we were free from the past.
Yeah.
Now that's powerful.
Very.
See?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and see, I never did like pastoring because I didn't like all the bondage. Okay. And so that's why I started the counseling center here I started in Albuquerque, then expanded in Phoenix. I had 2 offices for several years, but many pastors and their wives were coming to me for counseling. And that's because so much performance in all these religious environments, it becomes like a prison. And they hold the key to that prison door out of fear, out of bondage, out of performance.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I say it like this. The reason most people have a poor self-image is because they believe what other people say about them. Okay. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest things that happened to me, once I started getting free of my bitterness, guess what I could do, Lily? Then I could start actually loving Gary Lawrence unconditionally. Okay. And I ask people, ask me what I think of Gary Lawrence. They'll say, well, what do you think, Gary Lawrence? I said, man, I love that guy. He's awesome.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful human being. He's a man of heart, a man of passion. He has genuine joy. But you see, I had to get rid of that poison in my emotional bloodstream, that root of bitterness that was threading its way through my entire life. And now you're not going to believe this, but when I made up my emotional list, I had over 325 people on it.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like making amends in the AA process, which that's a painstaking, it is a painstaking undertaking, but I do see the value in letting all that weight go and healing that relationship.
Well, and Lily, you've been in the business of helping people get free from all those negative emotional things yourself. And you see people that have been through AA and they're still in bondage. Okay. You see people that are in church and they're still in bondage. Okay. I just happen to have been blessed with a certain amount of knowledge. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. I've got a doctorate of ministry degree, but, I just learned some truth that certainly has set Sylvia and I in a different direction with our life. And we were able to break that cycle before we passed it down to our sons.
Yeah.
We have two wonderful sons, two precious, awesome daughter-in-laws. We have 7 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. And we see the cycle has been broken, and that generational pass down, that door was closed with Sylvia and I. We did not pass it on down to the next generation.
It is. Yeah. That's my why.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my personal, one of my mentors says to become a transitional character. And
Right.
that's definitely one of my whys for sure.
Well, and I know you have so much knowledge and insight that I don't possess. And I'm looking forward to learning from you. I'm 77 years old, and I say it like this: if you quit learning, you quit living.
Yes, sir. That's
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
the bottom line is, people say, well, the older you get, the wiser you get. No, 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 that's not true. Age and wisdom don't always come together. More often than not, age just comes all alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wisdom comes with healing, I feel like. Wisdom.
Oh, yeah. Say that again loud. I want your audience to hear that.
I'll say it again. Wisdom comes with healing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take it, you and I are on this Zoom call together on this podcast interview. You're much younger than I am. But, I help thousands of people, and I can just discern from your appearance, from your countenance, from the spirit that you have, that you are genuinely free. Does that mean you never have conflict? No, but it does mean that you have the ability to handle that conflict. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, it surprised myself sometimes, Dr. G. Yeah. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I so enjoyed our time together. It's already up. I can't believe it.
It's hard to believe.
I know. I just want to put some things out there for some useful maybe steps for the listeners, that if they're seeing, bitterness, what you're saying about bitterness or rejection connecting with them, you offer some steps in your book, Rejection Junkies. Anything else that you would like to add to that?
Well, they can go to my website. I just now have my website up. It's rejectionjunkies.com. That's Rejection Junkies, Junkies. And on the homepage, there's a question. It says, are you a rejection junkie? And down at the bottom, there's a blue box that says, take the quiz. There's no cost for that. And there's about 60 different examples of overt and covert rejection. And that will come to my inbox, and I will respond and communicate with them. And then there's also a link in the upper right-hand corner of my website, contact us. And I will be most glad to respond to any questions that any of your audience has. And then they can buy my book on my website, rejectionjunkies.com. It has become a bestseller on Amazon. So they can go to Amazon and buy Rejection Junkies at $17.95. And Lily, I want to say this before we leave. I just consider it a real honor to have gotten acquainted with you. And I'm looking forward to spending some time with you as a professional to another professional, or a healed person to another healed person.
Yes.
And glean some insight, some wisdom from you. And I appreciate everything you're doing.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. G. It has been a pleasure spending this time with you and dropping into both of our spirits, our minds and our bodies and our souls. I appreciate you.
All right. God bless you. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you, Dr. G.
All right. Bye-bye.
What an amazing wealth of knowledge that Dr. G has after so many years and hours of helping people. It was very interesting, actually. I think I mentioned this on the show, that I don't think I've ever spoken about. It's kind of been off limits for me until I healed more about my relationship with God, my relationship with universe, and my past religious traumas that I have been through. So it was very interesting and a very safe space for me to open up that conversation. And I also loved the way that Dr. G framed the rejection piece. I think the way that he uses rejection can be used in many other terminologies as well, but it also makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense why we keep putting ourselves up for hurt and for pain is because that's all we know. And so, as we all know, we are here to heal. We are here to be a better version of ourselves. We are here to get complete fulfillment in life. And Dr. G does that with his practices as well as I do in my own. And so I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was definitely a nuanced one. It was definitely, a new one as it relates to the universe and God. So I'm happy to share that with you. I just wanted to say, my friend, I love you. Thank you for being here. Don't forget, you do have the ability to support the show by going to the link in the show notes and clicking on support. When you support the show, it helps me as an energy exchange for all of the time and the painstaking research and the preparation that I do to get ready for the show. You can choose your option as to how you want to support the show, and every little bit helps because it just really lets me know that you're out there. So in order to support the show, just go to the the link in the show notes and then click on support. And I appreciate you. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for being here and being with me. I want you to know that you are supported. You are so loved. You are more than enough. And I'm so happy that you're here. I'll see you next time.